the long-term survival of the uniqueness of local Francophone culture is actually dependent on the delivery of maximal autonomy to the citizenry and the subsidiary institutions. And that would mean that you could, as a conservative, you could make a simultaneous call to the nationalism that's part of the Quebec ethos and this desire for individual autonomy that's emerging in the aftermath of, let's say, the overreach of the nanny state. That's a nice vision. It gives everyone a place and also a role in living their life and preserving their cultural institutions responsibly at the same time.
I don't believe that the state can impose a language or a way of life. Okay, it's each of us who have to make those decisions. And you know, if the young generation, let's say like now, they don't want to talk about separation. So even if you wanted to push, it's not because the Parti Québécois is going to deliver 20 speeches a day that everybody's going to become separatist and it's going to happen overnight. You can't do those projects if you have the youth against yourself. And you know, we have to make sure that we bring it back at an individual level to make sure that, you know, we're promoting the fact that you should speak French, you should be bilingual, and it's working actually at many levels. Quebecers, francophones, and anglophones have never been as bilingual as they are today. And you know, that's a richness. I mean, we're the most bilingual. I'm currently in Montreal, in the most bilingual city in America. And I think it should be a richness, but unfortunately, over the last decade or half a century, it's been considered a source of division and fights. And that needs to change. We need to, and even if you say I'm bilingual, it doesn't mean that Quebec is bilingual or the common language or both languages are equal on the territory. Of course, because we're a small minority, we need to make sure that the common language remains French. But it doesn't mean that at an individual level, we cannot all be bilingual. And every parent I know in Quebec, they all want their kids to be bilingual. You know, my parents don't speak English. And my mom was a school bus driver, and my father was a sheet metal worker. Hardworking parents, perfect parents. But they didn't have the opportunity to learn English, and they sent me to a kindergarten in English, and they did huge sacrifice to make sure that I had better tools in my toolbox than they did. And I think every single parent wants that. And it was not the state that imposed that to them. They made a decision as good parents, like all good parents do everywhere. And you want your kid to do better than yourself.
And you should have the freedom and to do that, and the encouragement and the space to do that, because it is definitely, you see this is happening in the US too, is that as the nanny state and the radical leftist incursion into federal and state institutions proceeds apace, where that's hit the most resistance is on the issue of parent rights. And people are pulling their children in the US out of the public education system at a remarkable rate, because people will accept without protest a fair bit of interference with their lives on behalf of a hypothetically benevolent but ultimately totalitarian state, but they will not accept the propaganda campaigns directed at their children. And so the reason I'm saying that isn't for a political reason exactly, it's to point out the logic of the principle of subsidiarity, because you should have parents making decisions for their children precisely because there's no one who is going to care for children more than parents.
Exactly.
And if the state says it's delusional, because, well, how in the world can an abstract organization distant from the children it's serving, unrelated to them, and not knowing them personally, possibly care for them in all their individual particularity, as well as biologically related kin who are immediately living with them? I mean, it's a preposterous assumption on all fronts, and people will definitely rebel against that when their children are threatened. So let me turn to a different issue. I'm also interested, and I think this might be interesting to our international viewers and listeners. Now, Quebec has a very unique political culture, and so does your party provincially. Now, well When is the election going to be held in Quebec? That's the first question.
October 3rd.
Okay, October 3rd. So you're in the run-up to an election. Now, at the same time, as some of those listening know, Canada is involved in a leadership race for the leadership of the Conservative Party federally in Canada. So to become Prime Minister in Canada, you have to first rise to head a political party that has a chance of being elected in a majority of seats. And then if that does happen and you're the leader of the party, you become Prime Minister. And at the moment, there are 5 candidates on the leadership front for the federal Conservatives. And I've interviewed 3 of them, Pierre Poilievre, Roman Bobber, and Leslyn Lewis. And I was quite impressed with all 3 of them. They're quite different as people. They're very different in their backgrounds. But it seemed to me like the adults were in the room fundamentally, and they all had a certain degree of expertise and a fair degree of moral integrity. Jean Charest's people decided that that they wouldn't talk to me for one reason or another, although I invited them several times, and I haven't been as successful in my pursuit of Scott Aitchison's people. And that really has nothing to do with him and perhaps little to do with me. It's just been circumstances, unfortunately. How do you construe the relationship between your party provincially and the Conservative Party federally and the other Conservative parties in Canada? So let's start with that. How do you think that balance should be established? And what are you hoping for on the federal Conservative front in relationship to your aspirations on the provincial Conservative front?
Well, first off, you have to know that we have no organic links. Like unlike some other provinces, there's no link. We're 2 completely separate entities. Of course, we have the exact same name. We're both Conservatives, and we are center right. We're defined on the political spectrum. We're not far away from each other, but there's no direct links. That being said, for me, the most important part as a Conservative within Canada is to build bridges with other Conservative parties provincially. First and foremost, because I'm a decentralist, I'm an autonomist, and I do believe that it's important to reach out to those people. I think we have strong allies that Quebec has never exploited, because, when you're in a separatist dynamic where you have a party that is a very, very federalist party like the Liberals in Quebec have been over the last few decades, and on the other hand, you have the separatists. Well, the separatists don't want to work with anyone in Canada, even those who would like a little bit of decentralization to make sure that they don't show that Canada could work, and on the other hand, the federalists, they